Peddlar of Swaffham. Once long ago, when London Bridge was lined with shops, a peddler living in the country, far away from London, had a strange dream. He dreamed that if he went to London Bridge, he would hear some good news. The first time he had the dream, he didn't take much notice of it. The second time he had the dream, he began to wonder. And the third time he had the dream, he decided to make the trip to London town. He was too poor to hire a horse, and it was a very long walk. His shoes had almost worn out by the time he got there. He walked up and down the bridges for 3 days, waiting to hear what the good news might be. On the third day, one of the shopkeepers who kept a shop on the bridge could bear it no longer. He left his wife to serve the customers and went to speak to the peddler. "I've watched you walk up and down for 3 whole days," he said. "Have you something to sell?" "No," said the peddler. "Then are you begging?" asked the shopkeeper, looking at his worn shoes and dusty coat. "Certainly not," said the peddler. "Then what are you doing?" asked the shopkeeper. The peddler told him about his dream. The shopkeeper hooted with merry laughter. "Do you mean to say that you have come all this way because of a dream?" "I dreamed myself. Why, only last night I dreamed that in an orchard behind a peddler's house in Swaffham, which is a place I've never even heard of, there is an oak tree, and under the oak tree there is buried treasure. Now, do you think I would be so foolish as to leave my shop and go all the way to a place I've never heard of, just because I had a dream?" "Hey, where are you going?" "Home," called the peddler over his shoulder. "What a strange fellow," said the shopkeeper, and went back to his shop, shaking his head over the peculiarity of people. How was he to know that the peddler lived in a place called Swaffham, and that there was an orchard behind his house? Even walking quickly, it took several days for the peddler to get home. But as soon as he was there, he went into the orchard and started to dig. Sure enough, he found a chest of buried treasure, and a dream came true. And so the peddler was rich until the end of his days, and all because of a dream, or rather 2 dreams. If he had not taken heed of his own dream, he would not have heard the shopkeeper's dream, and no doubt the treasure which made him rich would be buried still. Now here is a story that will be familiar to many. But in saying that, I've seen very, very different versions of each of the fairy tales, so we shall see. Puss in Boots. Once upon a time, there was a miller who had 3 sons. When he died, he left his mill to his first son, his donkey to his second son, and because he had nothing else, he left his cat to the third son. The first son ground flour at the mill and sold it. The second son harnessed the donkey to a cart and carried things for paying customers. But what could the third son do with a cat, except let him sit in the sun and purr and drink milk? One day the cat said, "Master, give me a pair of boots and a sack, and you will see that I am not as useless as you think." It was a very strange request for a cat to make, but it was granted nonetheless. The cat, or Puss in Boots as the miller's son now called him, went into the forest and caught a rabbit. He put it in the sack, and then instead of taking it home to the miller's son, he took it to the king's palace. "Please accept this small present from my master, the Marquis of Carabas," said Puss in Boots. It was to be the first of many presents Puss in Boots took to the king, and each time he said he had been sent by his master, the Marquis of Carabas. And though the king never actually met the Marquis of Carabas, he soon became very familiar with his name. The miller's son knew nothing of the presents or of the Marquis of Carabas, and Puss in Boots didn't tell him. One day when Puss in Boots was at the palace, he overheard someone say that the king was about to take his daughter for a drive in the country. Puss in Boots hurried home. "Quick, master," he called, "go and bathe in the river, and I will make your fortune." It was another strange request for a cat to make, but the miller's son was used to his pet by now, and so he did as he was told. No sooner was he in the river than Puss in Boots took his clothes and threw them into the river with him. "Puss, Puss, what are you doing?" called the miller's son. Puss didn't answer. He was watching the road. Presently he saw the king's carriage in the distance. He waited until it was close, then he ran out in the road in front of him. "Help, help! My master, the Marquis of Carabas, is drowning. Please save him." It took but a moment to drag the miller's son, who hadn't the slightest idea what Puss in Boots was up to, from the river and find him some dry clothes. He looked so handsome in the fine velvet tunic and the doublet and hose borrowed from one of the footmen that the princess fell in love with him at once. "Father dear, may the Marquis of Carabas ride with us?" The king liked to please his daughter and agreed to her request at once. "Will you ride with us, Puss?" asked the king. Puss asked to be excused. He said he had something rather important to attend to. He ran on ahead of the carriage, and each time he saw someone at work in the fields he called, "The king asks who this land belongs to. Tell him it belongs to the Marquis of Carabas." The king did stop this carriage several times, and each time he received the same answer to his question. The Marquis of Carabas must be a very rich man, he thought. Puss in Boots ran so swiftly that soon he was a long way ahead of the carriage. Presently he came to a rich and imposing-looking castle, which he knew belonged to a cruel and wicked ogre. He went straight up to the ogre without so much as a twitching of whisker and said, "I hear you can turn yourself into any animal you choose. I won't believe a story like that unless I see it for myself." Immediately the ogre changed himself into a lion, and roared and growled and snarled. "There," he said when he had turned himself back into an ogre, "I hope I frightened you." "Must be easy to change yourself into something big," said Puss in Boots with a shrug. "I don't suppose you can turn yourself into something as small as, he seemed to be thinking. A mouse?" The ogre couldn't have a mere cat doubting his special abilities. He changed himself into a tiny mouse in the twinkling of an eye. It was the last time he changed himself into anything, because Puss in Boots pounced on him and ate him up before he could change back into an ogre. And that was the end of it. "Hurrah!" shouted the castle servants. "We are free of the wicked ogre at last. Hurrah!" "Your new master will always be kind, you can be sure of that," said Puss in Boots. "Who is our new master?" they asked. "The Marquis of Carabas, of course," said Puss. When the king's carriage reached the castle, Puss in Boots was standing at the drawbridge with the smiling servants gathered round him. "Welcome," he said with a beautiful bow. "Welcome to the home of my master, the Marquis of Carabas." The miller's son was too astonished to say anything except think to himself, "Whatever is Puss up to?" Luckily, Puss had time to explain while the king was getting out of the carriage. "What a rich man this Marquis must be," thought the king, "and such a nice young man too." Not long afterwards, the princess and the miller's son were married. They and Puss in Boots lived happily ever after in the castle that had once belonged to the wicked ogre. The Shepherdess and the Sweep. There we go. Once there was a shepherdess, not a real shepherdess, but a delicate porcelain one. She was very beautiful. She stood beside the porcelain sweep on a table in a dark and crowded parlour. The sweep was as black as coal except for his face, which was as pink and clean as the shepherdess's own. Just a pigtail hanging down his back and grey slanting eyes. The Chinese mandarin nodded all the time. He couldn't help it. It was the way he was made. The shepherdess called him grandfather, though he wasn't, because if he had been, she would have been Chinese too, and she wasn't. On the far side of the room, and facing the table where the 3 porcelain figures stood, was a carved wooden cabinet. Carved in the very middle of the door was a very peculiar man. He had a lopsided smile that was hardly a smile at all, and a beard and legs like a goat. The children who lived in the house, and sometimes came into the parlour, called him Mr. Goat-legged, Commanding General, Private Sergeant, because they thought it suited him. They were in a hurry, they called him Mr. Goat-legs. One day, Mr. Goat-legs asked the Chinese mandarin if he could marry the shepherdess. The Chinese mandarin nodded, as was his habit. Good, said Mr. Goat-legs, looking pleased. But, Grandpa, I don't want to marry horrid Mr. Goat-legs, said the shepherdess. It is too late now. I have given my consent, said the Chinese mandarin. The wedding will be tonight. Wake me up in time for the ceremony. And with no more ado, he nodded himself to sleep. The little shepherdess cried tears that looked like seed pearls. The sweep tried to comfort her. Please take me away from the parlour and out into the wide world, she pleaded. I cannot marry Mr. Goat-legs. The running stags carved on the side of the cabinet saw them climbing down to the floor. The shepherdess and the sweep are eloped, they cried. The mandarin woke with a start and began nodding so furiously his whole body rocked backwards and forwards. The shepherdess and the sweep had never seen him so angry and were very frightened. There's only one way to escape, whispered the sweep. You must go into the stove and up the chimney to the roof. It was a difficult climb, even for the sweep. It was dark and sooty and steep. The shepherdess was so afraid she would slip. If she fell, she knew she would break into 1,000 pieces. Do not look down, whispered the sweep as he followed behind and guided her feet to the nooks and crannies. Look up, towards the star that shines at the end of our journey. When the shepherdess looked up through the dark tunnel of the chimney, she could see a tiny speck of light, far, far away in the distance. The higher they climbed, the bigger it grew, and when they got to the top, it became the entire sky. The shepherdess and the sweep sat side by side on the rim of the chimney pot and looked wearily across the rooftops at the wide, wide world. The big, wide world was so very big and so very wide. She began to cry again. Please take me back to the parlour, she sobbed. I like the big, wide world even less than I like Mr. Goat-legs. Her face was soon stained with her sooty tears. The little sweep could not bear to see her so unhappy and agreed to take her back. The journey down the chimney was just as difficult as the journey up had been. It was just as dark, just as frightening. When they finally crawled out of the stove and into the parlour, they were met by a strange and eerie silence. Something has happened, cried the shepherdess. Oh, I just know something dreadful has happened. It had. In his anger, the Chinese mandarin had rolled off the edge of the table, and now he was lying in pieces on the floor. Oh dear, it's all our fault, cried the shepherdess. Oh, poor Grandpa, what are we to do? And she cried even more. We can't do anything, said the sweep, but don't worry. Someone is sure to come along and glue him together again. And someone did, but from that day onwards he lost his habit of nodding. It didn't matter how many times Mr. Goat-legs asked if he could still marry the shepherdess. The Chinese mandarin could not nod and give his consent. And so the shepherdess and the sweep were able to stand side by side until the end of their days.